Hey there, everyone. So let's go to the second part of culture. Let's get right to it so we don't waste any time here for us. I want to make sure that we are taking the most effective time. So in our previous lecture, we talked and engaged in regards to the idea of culture. Now we're going to go into a little bit more of a deep dive into what is that? What does that mean? What is culture? So first things first, let's talk about this. We're going to be looking at cultural diversity, essentially. So we talked about culture. We talked about how it kind of builds the socialization of who we are. It is very important towards symbols. It's important towards our understandings, norms, values, traditions, how we engage, why we engage, the things that we do, the aspects that we have, and what makes or doesn't make us into the people that we are and our understanding of the world around us as a whole. So before we get going, make sure you watch these videos. They're located on your Canvas, you'll see them, they're posted. They're very important for you to watch because you're going to really see an example of culture lag as someone, in this case, these children who were impacted by war in the Sudan. These videos are powerful, about 10 to 11 minutes, as it says on the screen, and they'll kind of show you the somewhat humorous, but also very impactful aspects of cultural shock and cultural lag, which we'll get to. So pause this video here, go watch these videos, or if you've watched them, come back and watch this lecture because I'm going to be referencing it a lot. So let's get to the meat and potatoes, right? Ethnocentrism and cultural relativism, right? Ethnocentrism is the idea of assuming one's culture constitutes the norm and or is superior to others. Said differently, those who believe that I'm just better than you because this is what I know. What I know is the best and I'm not going to learn otherwise. Think about how many people really throw their facts, figures, and knowledge on people, just really saying like, my way is the best way, your way, my way or the highway is that expression. This is very ethnocentric. The idea that my culture, my norms constitute a norm validity, and therefore other norms must be wrong. Culture shock, feelings of disorientation or frustration when in a new culture. We'll cover this in a few slides even more. But yeah, when you go to other countries and they do some things you don't understand, it leaves you perplexed and you don't know how to deal with it. So if you face culture shock, you can also face this when you go to new places, even in the United States. I always have people give examples in class. Think about some, put it on the yellow dig. It's a great, easy tool, right? How about any of you from a small town? Or any of you from a really, really small town? Think about how it was coming to ASU if you've been on campus, or think about when you went to a major city. Not the same, right? Cultural relativism. Can't speak, my apologies. The understanding of a culture on its own terms. Basically, when you can see from their perspective of another, right, then you can understand their culture. It's very important to understand people from their regards, but we'll get into this where cultural relativism has some flaws is if you go to a massively patriarchal culture and you're from, let's say, like the United States, we're dealing with a lot of problems right now towards equality of gender. But let's just say you go to a country where women do not have rights to third-class citizens, yet you don't change your views to then just allow women to be degraded on, right? You don't do this as well with countries that do not have more understanding of the queer community and shun them, and in some cases even still kill and stone people who are of the queer community. Don't change your views on love is love and equality for all just because you're in a new culture. But understanding where they're looking from can help in some cases in a positive light of understanding they're not weird. They're doing this because it's part of their culture. Now, again, that's not to the extreme situations. And then you have Xenocentrism, right? This is assuming another culture is superior to your own. This isn't as crazy as some people think. I feel like people calling xenophobe all the time on the news has really tainted this word. You know, if you're somebody who went overseas and spent a semester in France, let's say that's a very popular one, and you've now decided that you are French, you're European, that's kind of the same thing. Those who believe that German cars are the best or sushi's only good if it's from a Japanese store place because of the origin of the food, right? There's people who really, you're in love with anime, so now it's what you surround yourself in. This can be the idea of xenocentrism. One culture is superior to your own, and how that is personified can really be up to you. Same thing with ethnocentrism, bonds teams together, sports teams, and it makes you unify together with mechanical solidarity, but it can also make the KKK. So with good and bad, it's kind of the world of sociology. So ethnocentrism via food. Time to get hungry, y'all. Get ready to get hungry. So if I was to put this up here, where would this be from, right? It's an American burger. If I was to put this up here, maybe some of you knew it was Ethiopian. By the way, bomb, if you haven't been Ethiopian, have some. This is what you could say that as a chimichurri steak, right? It might not be American, but many people associate steak with America, right? And then what is this? It's escargot, it's French. So what you see is ethnocentrism tied to food. People believe their food's the best. How many of you have gone out with people who won't eat anything? My little nephew is about to be 13, if not 13. The dude will not eat anything but pizza and cheese pizza. If you bring him food he doesn't like, he'll try to be polite, but he won't even eat it. How many of you can think of not trying food? I bet you quite a few of you have not tried Ethiopian because it looks different, right? Many of you have not had snails. I don't like them personally, but I tried. So how many of you have gone out of your comfort zone to eat the food of other cultures? Or are you ethnocentric and believe that your food, this cheeseburger, this American steak, is what you want? This is kind of a little experiment. Sorry if I made you hungry. Pause and go get some snacks, right? So Americans, we tend to think our food's the best, but that's not how it breaks down. The reality is that we've been normified through cultural values to love our food. So sorry for making you hungry again. So ethnocentrism continued, assuming one's culture constitutes the norms. How about when we talk about England and Australia? If I was asked you, what side of the road does Australia drive on? Many of you are going to say, the wrong side. Why would you say the wrong side? They drive on the other side, right? Or they drive on the left versus they drive on the right. Many of you say the wrong side because we've been taught that our side is right. We also have the idea of many times you'll hear people feeling moved to go volunteer overseas, and they do this in their way of life to be superior. This can be also seen as cultural imperialism, right? How many people, when they go over to build a house or do missionary work, are going over preaching about how your culture is not as superior as mine? Let me tell you about my Lord and Savior, or let me build this house for you, you poor, poor person. This is also good when you join and do this in the sense of like trying to be a good person, but be careful because you might be going in and deliberately imposition of one's own cultural values on another culture, right? You might be going in and being a little imperialistic, which America's pretty good at, by the way. So taken from this, ethnocentrism isn't really bad, like I mentioned. It's not always so terrible. It unifies people under norms that are shared, sports, cultures, etc., right? But taken too far, you can get the idea of racism being tied into it, implicit bias, right? Really good topic here to talk about things of norms that you may or may not see as right or wrong. What is yours versus what is not yours? What's an example of cultural imperialism? Talk about it on Yellow Dig, right? Xenophobia is different, and maybe from what you've heard on the news, like I mentioned, right? We're not talking about the idea that someone hates another country. Xenocentrism is very interesting, the idea that I like this culture. So it could just be that you're a huge anime fan, and now you are very embodied into that cultural element, right? So I have some examples here for you. I'm going to play these videos for you just briefly, not all of them. Same as the last time. If you want to watch all of them, feel well to do so.
Let's talk about the symbolism of capitalism in this show. Episode 4 spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Walker and Lamar are the ones that rolled up into this place first, and then the Dora Milaje showed up. And then Walker acts exactly like much of the world sees American military and even tourists, like a complete ethnocentric douchebag. He's quick to claim that the Dora Milaje have no jurisdiction there. Well, does he? Wakanda's got its own issues of xenophobia.
So I'm going to stop that video there just because I said you can watch all these on your own time. It's a great example. I wasn't a huge fan. I'm a huge Marvel nerd, by the way, but I wasn't a huge fan of Captain America and the Winter Soldier, right? Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But if you didn't know, the origination of Captain America was actually used as a punching bag because Jack Kirby and Stan Lee wanted to make sure that they were throwing jabs at why we hadn't joined the war. So regional Captain America was much more like the depiction here in the show, that he was kind of like a hardcore America douchebag, like all jokes aside. So like this idea of going in and instituting our values is very cultural imperialistic, right? So it's a good example of ethnocentrism, coming in and thinking that I have jurisdiction, I have rights, my way of life is right? Another video for you.
I just learned something that blew my mind. I am not from the US, so I've never seen this map, but apparently this is what they use to teach kids about world geography. Why is this continent cut in half and this is in the middle of the whole thing? Truthfully, this is the one I used to learn. Look at this. Look at Greenland being so big, and look at North America being so big compared to these two continents down here, South America and Africa. Now this is the real proportions.
Let that just sit with you for a second. If you think that our limitations of what we're taught, what we're not taught is based on only academic, yeah, that map is a great point. A lot of our viewpoints on the world have been based on our country being the best. And we make our country look bigger because that sense of largeness is actually visceral. We then look at ourselves as being superior. It's a really big and important thing.
Let's talk about the symbolism.
So let's talk about a fun topic here, which many of you may choose around Yellow Day, culture shock. Essentially, when you go to a new culture, a new experience, and you don't feel like you understand, you're traveling and feeling lost because you don't speak the language, do not share the same beliefs or hobbies, the social norms are different than mine, small town versus big town. I've already referenced this, so I'm going to go a little faster through this, but it's the feeling of disorientation or frustration when in a new culture. Think about this, use this for your yellow league. It's a great one, right? If you've ever traveled or been somewhere, you're going to have experiences. One of my favorite is in Rome. If you've never been to Italy, sidewalks are an option to get around slow cars. So when you're traveling there as an American, remember that. In Egypt, they use their horn, honk, honk, as their turn signal. There's tons of things, right? My father grew up in a very poor town. He was very kind of low poor class. Had never eaten anything but kind of like crappy American food. When he moved to London to do a job that he was brought to, they wanted to try to shock him and embarrass him and make him eat sushi. He had never eaten it. He ended up winning the situation because he was down to try whatever. But it was a culture shock because eating different foods, going through different experiences, going from a small town to a big city, the ways that we interact with one another are not all the same. So that ethnocentrism tied behind it, we get lost because we don't understand our situation. The more you expand your diversified world, the more your norms are increased. The more diversification that you have allows you to have less culture shock. The less culture shock you have, the more ability you have to enjoy being in different places. It's that feeling when we travel, but we also feel that feeling of disorientation, loneliness, feeling alone, feeling like no one can hear us. Their norms are different than mine. It's a very important and powerful feeling. Think back to all of your experiences, share some culture shocks. Please, I love when students share that. So I have some videos here of different types of culture shock. Feel free to watch. They're all pretty fun. They're all from TikTok, but basically I'm not going to play these here. Please feel free to watch these. They are fun and they're examples that people have experienced in culture shock. So cultural relativism, the understanding of a culture on its own terms. Like I mentioned before, this is being able to learn the norms, values, or traditions in the practice of cultural relativism. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? This is good and bad, right? Sometimes fitting in comes at a steep cost. Always be aware of the cost. I mentioned this, if you go to a country that is extremely patriarchal, or let's say you move to North Korea, right, and you are under orders of a dictator, don't change the values that hold to your ethics just because of the culture. Just know that cultures have different values, different passions. And I'll play a little TikTok here for you as well.
For all those that don't know, cultural relativism is basically the idea that we need to judge people based on the context of their culture and not just based on what they do. And I think I need to emphasize that I definitely do see the importance of looking at a situation in the context of the culture where it happened. However, if cultural relativism is true, it means that we can't say that other cultures' traditions are morally inferior to our own. And to be honest, I don't feel as though setting that precedent is safe because those traditions can include things like cannibalism or homophobia. I also don't believe that just because your society collectively...
He makes a good point with that, and I'll stop the video there. Once again, watch more if you want to, right? If you go to a cannibalistic culture, don't start eating people. That's just a bad idea. You don't want to do that. But, there are cultures that have different values, different traditions, different norms, and it's not wrong or right. And one of my favorite quotes is that one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, right? What we understand is based upon the socialization of our own values, which are very much encoded inside us, and also usually have a very ethnocentric standpoint because we are taught that we are best. Gen X was the last generation to really receive education on it, but American exceptionalism was a big thing, right? So this idea of falling victim to other cultures' norms, even if they don't match our own, be careful, but also don't go in thinking everyone's wrong. So it's kind of like a mixed bag of tricks, right? You got to learn it, but you also got to make sure you're being cautious of what you hold as your values.
For all those...
So let's look at Xenocentrism. The best or nothing German cars, right? French and Spanish wine is the only good wine. That's exactly kind of the sense here, right? Xenocentrism is not as extreme as xenophobia or xenophobic or xenophobia. Embracing a culture and seeing their products, values, and methods is more of your vibe, right? Essentially, like you might move, like I said, to Europe and decide that you want to be European and you love European values. You might only drive German cars because it's part of your identity. There's nothing wrong with this. Just don't go to the extreme. That's kind of the lesson of all of sociology. Just because you love German cars, and start embracing that, don't decide that all other car companies are evil and dumb. Just because you think French and Spanish wine's the best, that's not bad. It might be true in your case, but don't go hating other cultures. But being in love with a culture and embracing that is not always a bad thing. It's just assuming one culture is superior to your own. So you may change and shift and osculate your own value structures. So subcultures and countercultures. Subcultures fit in with the larger mainstream culture and have a separate culture. Examples of this can be ethnicity, race, customs, food, and experiences, right? Countercultures go against the mainstream culture in some ways. Examples, homeschooling, protesters, alternative lifestyles. You can look at vegans here, right? So just the difference here is that you can be a part of many subcultures or counterculture and still be within inside a culture, right? Countercultures constantly are just things that are against the mainstream, that are against the norms. So look at situations that may or may not have changed and oscillated through time. Those who were part of LGBTQ plus were seen as a counterculture before it was more accepted. In many cases still deal with this. Subcultures, you can literally be multiple parts of multiple intersections of this. You could be a certain group of an ethnicity. You could also have certain food preferences. Think about your friends who do or don't like sushi, right? So there's a subculture of people who eat certain food. Video gamers fall into this, right? You may be a part of Dota community, you may be a part of COD community. They don't really tend to intersect very well, but you could be a part of both. So you fit in with the larger main culture, but you have little hobbies. What are your little quirks that make you you, right? We have the conversation of high and popular culture. This is one thing I always encourage you all to use maybe for your illitic posts, right? Pop culture is, or low culture as it's called as well, refers to the form of cultural expression usually associated with the masses, consumer goods and consumer products, trends, clothing, nightclubs, events. High culture refers to those forms of culture usually associated with the elite or the dominant classes, the more exclusive. That's kind of the answer that answers them all. Pop culture are things that you can attend. Anybody can attend if you can pay the price of admission or if you know about it. High culture is think about the things that are exclusive, right? Do you go to a basketball game or do you like to watch polo? Do you go to opera or do you go to Broadway? Is it a charity event that you had to pay $1,000 to go to and then donate to, or is it a nightclub, right? Do you know about it? Do you have an invitation to the Met Gala, or do you go look at fashion online? The difference is socio prestige, right? High culture involves a certain status to enter, which we'll get into when we talk about classism, right? But pop culture, everyone has access to based on being able to purchase, price of admission. High culture really is, if you know, you're invited, VIP, right? Not VIP. When we talk about that, right? This is the difference in how we break it down. What is considered unique? What is considered pop culture? It's really depending upon it. Think of some examples, right, about it. What do you think is pop culture versus high culture? How has it shifted and oscillated through times, right? Different things become popular and then they become no longer high culture, they become pop culture because everyone has access. So the things that are more exclusive are gonna hold to the idea of the elite society. And then we have high culture versus pop culture. Essentially pop culture, not exclusive, easy to talk about, more common. I have this Beverly Hills song by Weezer. You're welcome to listen to it if you haven't. High culture is expensive, formal, more exclusive, crazy rich Asians, unique art, right? Think of some examples, high culture versus pop culture. There's a lot out there, right? And then I have different types. You know, this is an example of subcultures, right? Elder emos, and then now we have new emos, rap and hip hop culture, gamers, TikTok algorithm feeds, which one are you on? Just different variations to understand what is and what isn't part of the culture that you identify with, the various intersections of my personal self, the things that I take part in, groups together, groups not together, the battle between country and rap music, which one's bad, which one's not, TikTok feed algorithms, gamers, right? Like, are you an FPS or are you an RTS gamer, right? There's a lot. 2 videos you can watch here.
Hey,
one's kind of funny.
get out of my sandwich.
Right? And you have the idea of alternative subcultures. You feel free to watch them, but essentially cultures also change dynamically. Innovations, new material cultures created and discovered, takes a process. Is it accepted? Is it not? If it's not accepted, we have culture. If it's not accepted quickly, we have culture lag, those who also don't have access to the new technology. When we talk about the video you should have watched, Boys of Sudan, they faced a lot of cultural lag, being that they were from a semi-peripheral nation that hadn't really advanced technologically. So when they came to the US at the time, they really didn't understand things like the butter on a plane, if you watch the video, if you watch the movie, the idea of a vacuum cleaner, the idea of a can opener, fresh coming water, right? When the material culture is created in time, it takes for the non-material culture to catch up. So we have these technological innovations, but how many people have access to them? Cultural diffusion, the spread of one cultural practices, beliefs, and items, food or music or clothing, right? You have the idea of diffusing cultural connections, right? Eating sushi in America, eating KFC in Asia. You know, KFC ends up being a huge thing in Asian countries, whereas eating sushi in America has become more and more prominent. I remember when I was the only one of my friends who ate it, and now it's considered popular. It's changed. It's no longer kind of unique. Might not even have, maybe even had a little bit of a high culture status if you were that culture to eat it. Now everyone eats it. There's like 17 sushi restaurants by my house, seriously. Diffusion and appropriation, responsibility on those who take an idea and a custom from other cultures, right? Many of you have heard of cultural appropriation. wanting to embrace a cultural identity and falling in love with it, with the idea of this, it's not necessarily evil. It's a xenocentrism, right? You might like their culture, but do you have the right to wear this? Is it offensive to wear this? It's all up to you to make sure that you don't appropriate a culture inappropriately. Diffusion and sharing your culture is great. Appropriation and making it part of your life, not a problem, but use responsibility, use your brain. Don't take something that has religious ceremonial value and has a way to be taken as offensive. This is where the line draws, because you have to always be thinking at the micro and the macro level. What impact is this action having? We got a video here kind of talking about Doc Martens. Feel free to watch it if you want. It's interesting, talking about how even colors and the symbols can be powerful.
Doc Martens doesn't sell red laces.
And then I got some funny videos if you want to watch and you have time, right? Key and Peele, someone's got to say it. They're taking the opposite of the racist stance, and Curb Your Enthusiasm, social etiquette, the rules and norms that we have. Feel free to watch these on your own time. They are posted. But yeah, I hope you enjoy those videos. Other than that, stay on top of your deadlines, don't fall behind. And yeah, we've talked about culture. We've talked about the culture shocks. It's a little different here online. Hopefully you've learned some things. Please share your thoughts on Yellow Dig, and I'll be back with you soon to discuss other types of socialization. All right, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you listening here. If you have any questions, as always, please make sure to hit me up and let me know what your thoughts are. Sorry about the delay, I had an issue.